Hi, my name is Dr. Bosworth, and today we're talking all about insulin and why it's king. Most patients that come into the clinic and want to learn more about the ketogenic diet are coming because of the almost effortless ability to lose weight while on a ketogenic diet. When ketones are flowing in the body, your fat cells let go of energy so easily that it makes weight loss almost effortless. I got interested in the ketogenic diet because of the power it has to repair brains. I take care of lots of folks with brain injuries, and this diet has been masterful, better than any medication that I have, to help patients repair their brains. But let's not deny what attracts most people to the ketogenic diet, and that is the incredibly easy ability to lose weight. So it goes without saying that when people come in and ask for help with weight loss, that they want help emptying their fat cells. It seems obvious, but never in 20 years has a patient come in and said, "Hey doc, I want you to help me lose this muscle." That's not what they're after. They want fat loss. So to empty the fat cells, there are some very specific rules. And the key commander for fat cells and whether or not they'll let go of their energy is insulin. Insulin is king. If a fat cell is influenced by insulin, it will lock up its exits, meaning it will hold the fat inside that fat cell. It can pull in any floating glucose around it, but nothing can get out of a fat cell in the presence of insulin. So think of it as the entrances to the fat cells are abundant and those sugar cells can come right in, but the exits to those fat cells are locked down when insulin is present. The rules are when insulin is present, that fat storages go up and you don't burn fat. When insulin is down, you burn fat and you don't store it. When insulin's high, those fat cells get filled up and you cannot burn fat as energy. As soon as your insulin sinks, the fat cells open up and you can use the energy stored in those fat cells to energize your body. Insulin is produced by your pancreas as a signal that sugar needs to be tucked away. So as soon as insulin is floating around your bloodstream, it's telling those glucose molecules to be gone. Where do they go? Two places. Insulin either lifts them inside cells so that your cells can burn those glucoses. For example, if there's glucose in your bloodstream, insulin will lift it out of the bloodstream and put it in a liver cell or a muscle cell or a skin cell or a brain cell. All of them will burn up that glucose really quickly and use it as fuel. That's one way that insulin gets rid of glucose. The other way that insulin gets rid of glucose in the bloodstream is to tuck it inside a fat cell. In fact, if there's insulin influencing a fat cell, it will act almost as a vacuum to pull that glucose out of the bloodstream and tuck it away as quickly as possible. I think it's really important to remember that your fat cells don't care where that glucose came from. If you got up this morning and had a nice tall glass of orange juice with a really healthy apple, your blood sugar went up and your body produced insulin. The insulin took that healthy orange juice sugar, the stuff that you thought you were being so healthy about, and it tucked it inside a fat cell. Those carbohydrates are fattening to our bodies, especially when insulin has been in abundance. If your insulin is high, it doesn't give your fat cells a chance to even empty. I like to use a couple of pictures from some old textbooks to show the point that fat cells will absolutely listen to insulin and do not do anything else until insulin is gone. Take a look at this drawing. If you look, this man looks like he has two tumors on his thighs. In fact, they're large mounds of fat on his thighs. And how did he get those? He was living at a time when insulin was injected and his body didn't make any. I've said in other posts or other videos that insulin is evil. I'm oversimplifying that. Insulin is actually a vital hormone for our bodies to survive. This man has these two fatty tumors on his thighs because he was lucky enough to be living at a time when he could inject insulin because he didn't make it. He injected the insulin in the exact same spot over and over and over again never going more than 24 hours without insulin. What did that do? In those thighs, there were a few fat cells, but mostly muscle cells. However, when you bathed those areas in insulin, those fat cells grew and grew and grew. Over 100 times bigger, more prominent than they were supposed to be. And they did that because of the commanding leadership of insulin. Insulin told those cells in those thighs to store sugar, turn it into fat. And never did this man go more than 24 hours without a shot. And what that did was it grew fatty tumors in his thighs. Here's another example of somebody who injected insulin over and over again into his lower abdomen. And once again, he did it in the exact same spots, and those cells were duly influenced by the constant presence of insulin. I find this in my patients today who have insulin resistance, otherwise called prediabetes or metabolic syndrome. And they've grown heavier and heavier and heavier because their body produced more and more insulin over time. What did that do to their whole body? It did to their whole body what these patients did to those areas where they injected insulin. They made so much insulin that every fat cell in their body recruited friends and filled up with those sugars, only to be locked and stored away because the insulin never got low enough. Let's use one more example from 1915. This document shows the example of a doctor writing a prescription for what patients who lived without insulin were to eat. If you look carefully, they said you could have 10 grams of carbohydrates. That was about 40 calories. He could have 75 grams of protein, which was about 300 calories. But the most abundant calories in 1915 for this type 1 diabetic was from fat. He had 150 grams of fat per day, which is over 1,300 calories. This is how they constructed the diet for somebody to live without insulin. Why was that? Because the fat did not require insulin to get inside those blood cells. Fat turned into ketones, and those ketones were readily available to the mitochondria or those furnaces throughout the body to somebody who didn't produce insulin. There is another unique part of this that I think is worth teaching. In this diet, you'll see that there were 15 grams of alcohol prescribed. I would guess that these 15 grams of alcohol was probably a distilled alcohol because there's no carbohydrates in it. And just like ketones, alcohol doesn't need the help of insulin to go inside a cell. Alcohol and ketones act the same in one way. They don't need the help of insulin to get inside the cell. The carbohydrates needed the help of insulin to get inside that cell to be used as a fuel. If you remember in one of my earlier videos, I talk about this really deadly situation called ketoacidosis. Ketoacidosis is when the body makes an abundant amount of ketones in the body, and it's coupled with a very high glucose that floats around in the blood. This is what happens when insulin isn't around. That glucose stays flowing in the bloodstream and never gets sorted to the inside of a cell anywhere, not into a fat cell or a muscle cell or a liver cell. It just circulates in the blood. When the glucose gets high and the ketones get high, somehow they needed some breaks in 1915 to slow down the production of ketones. And one of the breaks that they used was alcohol. The distilled alcohol would get inside those blood cells and stop the production of those ketones. It wasn't perfect, and patients still had a very fragile life living without insulin. But it's one of the answers they used in 1915. Today, we are very thankful for the use of insulin in patients that don't have it, but most of my patients have an abundance of insulin. They have so much insulin that every one of their fat cells is overstuffed. My recommendation for this is quit eating carbs. Take those carbs down to less than 20 carbs per day. You do that, and slowly that insulin level in your body will decrease to the point where you'll start emptying those fat cells. Slowly, by eating 20 carbs or less, your body will burn through those extra sugars, and eventually that sugar gets less and less and less. This is what allows for that easy, effortless weight loss that happens when people are on a ketogenic diet. So let's just recap one more time. Insulin is a very powerful hormone. I would say that it's one of the king hormones in the body. If you've got glucose floating around in your system and your body makes insulin, insulin will command that sugar to hop inside a cell, either a muscle cell to be used as fuel or a fat cell to be used as storage. Insulin siphons those carbohydrates into the storage of fat cells, and that is one of the reasons for the obesity problem we have today. Take a minute to study these 3 circles. You'll notice that I outlined the carbs in the red circle, the fats in the white circle, and proteins in the gray circle. You'll see some examples of where foods have both protein and carbs, or carbs and fat, and a few of them that have protein, carbs, and fat. Use this chart as just a guide to say, how can you sort out which foods have high carbs, high fat, or high protein? Remember that a ketogenic diet is not a high protein diet. It is a high fat diet. And with that comes a lower and lower insulin as long as you keep those carbs low. I hope this was helpful. Take a look at my blog if you want to learn more about the ketogenic diet, or check out the book that I wrote any way you can. I'll take a thumbs up or subscribe to this channel. Until next time, I'm checking out. Dr. Boz.